Okay. I'm Maddie Hecker.
I'm Lady
I'm
Horn.
Sebastian. You're going. Sorry,
Sorry.
I'm Sebastian.
I'm Charlotte.
I'm Cora.
Okay. I can read the first question. Um, what was your reaction to the topic on naive dialecticism and formal logic, especially when I discussed the Ten Commandments and Arjuna the warrior? I kind of said, kind of thinking about the statement, thou shalt not murder, the Ten Commandment, a part of the Ten Commandments, kind of seems like silly to think about in formal logic, just because I feel like there's so many situations I can think of that, like self-defense, or if you were in the military, that it would just kind of seem not really appropriate to say that it's decontextualized or that a truth is constant like that, which kind of
Mhm.
relates to Arjuna, like his dharma was to protect his like country, or he was a warrior, so it was his like duty to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was super. I don't think that like things are like black and white all the time. I think that it really addressed like how the Arjuna story addressed how like things can have like a gray area where like you can have like kind of a conflict, things can be contradictory, but there can still be like you can still like be a good person. Like it isn't just like if you kill, you're a horrible person. Like if you steal, you're a bad person. It's not just black and white. And I thought that like when I heard about that, I was like, yeah, I feel like I talk about that a lot. Like I don't think a lot of issues or concepts are black and white, but there's more of like a kind of gray area. So
I felt like I found it really interesting because, like, I had heard the Ten Commandments, whatever, and it never really gave it like a second thought at all. Like, don't kill people, but definitely like that there is a gray area, and like, even though you say like don't kill, that's bad, whatever, there's still, like you said, there's still situations where like that's the right, like people like soldiers and stuff. Like, there's a gray area.
Yeah, I was the Ten Commandments and like that whole like when is it okay to kill, like context truth things, something I thought about a lot because I went to a Catholic school. So like we've had whole discussions on like what that means and when. So it wasn't really anything new to me. For me, it was just always like, yeah, like in terms of like self-defense, is killing like a good thing to do? No, but sometimes it's like a necessary thing to do. And that doesn't mean you're like evil.
Right.
I agree with everything you've all said. Kind of going back to like what Charlotte was talking about. Um, Before like learning about this topic and talking about it, I kind of always thought that like murder is murder. Like that's kind of how I saw it. But then like once we started talking about it, and I heard like the different perspective, I was kind of like, yeah, like you can definitely argue there are different situations, like things happen, stuff like that, which is it also goes hand in hand with the Arjuna example about how he obviously doesn't want to kill his family. So um, it definitely opened my eyes more to kind of realize like things are situational, like they're not always black and white. Kind of like you all said.
Yeah,
yeah.
I feel like also, um, I feel like it's also kind of true to say, like, kind of like with the whole like balancing thing, that some situations aren't always like contextualized though. Like other crimes, like I don't know, one just coming to the top of my mind is like stealing. I feel like, I mean, like right now, I can't think of like a situation that like stealing would be like good or okay. So I feel like there's also still some truth to the formal logic side of things.
I I can agree with that. I think they're good like guidelines, you know what I mean? I just don't think that like it instantly means you're like evil if you like violate one of them. Because like I think stealing is a good one. Like I don't think stealing is good, but at the same time, sometimes people are like situationally forced to steal because like maybe they're trying to steal food for their family and like they don't have any means of making money. Like what are they supposed to do? Like just like starve? Like they're gonna desperate times call for desperate needs. And I think a lot of things are situational. But one thing I saw that was like a good example of formal logic, like where it does work, is just like laws for driving. Like green means go and red means stop. And it's not just like, oh, well, like you can kind of go sometimes like on a red light. Like it doesn't make sense like that. So like there are definitely search like circumstances that like you need formal logic for.
Yeah.
I think the idea with the Ten Commandments and just anything like formal logic is just like these things like stealing's never good, but like you can justify it to where like I remember when we were doing like stages of like morality in high school, it was something about like stealing very expensive life-saving medication. Where that's not a good thing, but like
Mhm.
you could justify why you would do that for like your child, and that doesn't mean you're a bad person.
Right.
I kind of have one more personal example
Mhm.
um of like naive dialecticism. I don't know how to say it. But basically I feel like when I was growing up, like my parents were like pretty strict to begin with, like at the start of high school. And I like didn't always follow the rules. So like it kind of just like caused like a lot of tension. And then they like went from just thinking like, oh, you can't do anything to like, okay, let's just like give you a curfew. Let's like make sure you text us like a couple times, like every couple hours, like make sure you're alive. And like giving me a little bit more freedom while like also making sure I was alive, I feel like was a good balance versus just like you can't do anything like anytime. Like, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I just feel like it's a good way. It's a good way of thinking. Like, I didn't think about uh, how you could apply it in different ways, like the gray area. Like, it just can be better sometimes. I can read the second question if we're cool to move on.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So the second question is, were you able to make the connection between the fruit analogy and white cultural values, such as rugged individualism and competition?
I kind of related it to the active orientation character value. And I said that like the Apple community realized that like there was like a need for diversity. They're like, oh, I want to try to get to know these other fruits. And so their solution was just to invite them over. And I feel like that kind of like just because they invited it over there, it was just like a quick solution to their like problem, quote unquote, of not having any fruit diversity in their community. So I kind of feel like it was just their way of quickly solving a problem, not actually looking at the problem, because once all the other fruits got there, they one had to assimilate to the apple culture and they were just kind of like, okay, like put all your fruits away, like we only eat apples here. And so they had to assimilate, so they weren't practicing like the inclusion that like should have been the like solution to their problem as well. And um what else, I feel like I had one more point, but yeah, I just feel like it was just something like that was a quick fix. And oh, what I was gonna say, all the other fruits kind of just like congregated together, like no one like was really mixing, so it just kind of shows that their solution wasn't really a solution to the problem.
Kind of talked more about like uh more specifically towards like the actual one of the actual values. So I kind of talked more about like the competition value in white culture. And I brought up the example that he used one day about like the divorce rate, how it's different in like America compared to Malaysia or something like that. And so I talked about like how I tried to relate it to the fruit analogy where the fruits like they have to give up kind of their culture, their ethnicity, things like that to be more related to the apple. So like how in the for the competition, like in America, people just see it like, oh, I want to win my side. Like I don't want to, they don't really see it from the other person's perspective. Whereas like in different countries, they um they don't they actually like listen to each other and so I just kind of tried to relate that, if that makes sense, like just how they have to give up kind of their culture to be more like the white culture.
Yeah, I think that like that separation of like having to I just think it's interesting that like I focus on individualism and how like the apples like because they want to be their own fruits, like they want to continue to be their own fruits. Maybe they won't think about including the other fruits into their lives. You know what I mean? Like their cultural values and everything. So like, well, it is like nice that I think it's like they want to be their own person. It's like you have to also like be willing to see that everyone's connected in a way. Like we all have our own perspectives on reality. And I think that when the apples are just like dominant, they aren't really getting the full picture, kind of like the elephant stuff. But yeah, I think a lot of honestly, I think a lot of the analogies throughout like the power dynamic just like really related to the questions, like almost all of these questions. But they're pretty useful.
So I guess I was also kind of thinking a little bit more about like the individualism. And I was thinking about like how he said that the like depression rates are a lot higher here than like a lot of other places, and how like, Apple culture again, like being individual and I'm my own person and whatever, but then you have to be self-supporting and you don't reach out for help when you need it.
No, I used individualism as my main one too, of just like apple culture, you're all like separate entities, and then you have like the other fruits who like are having to adapt to just being, I guess, more inherently individual and like selfish, I guess, compared to what they might be used to culturally.
I kind of also said, I don't know if this is like a little bit of a stretch, but possibly competition that when the other groups were like came to the Apple community that like they were like forced to put their fruits away. Like I don't know if that's kind of in a way like the Apple community like trying to like win or like prove that they're like the best. So I don't know if that would maybe be another way of like competition.
Yeah, no, I totally can agree with that. I think that competition, like, because of the that like type of mentality, you're always comparing things. So when you're introduced to like another fruit or like a new cultural value, then you're comparing it to the one you already have. And when you compare it, it's like, okay, well then the next question is which one's better?
Mhm.
And I think that the competition, like the Apple's just like they want it to be a competition. They're always winning in their heads.
Yeah.
Can read
So,
number three if everyone's
okay,
ready.
yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Has the elephant and squirrel analogy helped you to understand how power differential affects the dynamics of your interactions with white people and people of color? I kind of talked about the how it affects like day-to-day interactions, things like that. There's many times where you see examples of white privilege, but I guess kind of what opened my eyes about it was like I don't notice it as much or I don't realize that it's happening because of the white privilege that I have. Like the squirrel and the elephant, like the elephant didn't realize he was playing the size card, which is what we talked about, because he was simply an elephant. Like he didn't have to worry about any animals being bigger than him. Just like how white people like that's what they know. They don't even realize that they're doing it. Which is the biggest point that I took out of it. Which kind of relates back to how we said he didn't have any empathy for the squirrels because like it just goes back to half the time not even realizing that you have the white privilege.
Yeah, I said pretty much like the same thing of just it really helps with like just the everyday stuff that you don't even like realize. Like the elephants, like, they didn't even like think about like the water fountains because that's just not something that ever had to like affect that never like affected them. So they just like that was a non-issue to them. And then yeah, like also like the performative aspect of it, of like when that was brought up, instead of them like lowering like the fountain, they just like put the names of the squirrels they stepped on. So it's like, yeah, we're doing something, but they're not addressing the problem. They're just making it seem like, or performing to like care when they aren't actually interested in changing the root of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. You got it.
I said, like when he was telling us to put ourselves in like the squirrel's perspective and try to feel what they would feel, I feel like it was just like in this small little situation, like I felt like irritated or like frustrated because I feel like the elephants like just weren't even like listening, or they were just kind of like beating around the bush by putting like the names on the wall. And I said, um, that kind of connects again with like the active orientation, like the elephants just trying to quickly fix a problem and rather than like actually listening to the squirrel's problem. And I also kind of said that like within interactions, I feel like if a person of color is like racist towards like a white person, it's kind of just like there's not really like that much of a emotional reaction, I think. Like it's just kind of like nothing's really like, I don't know, done, or like it's not that big of a deal. But I feel like it's a lot different like when like a white person is racist toward like a person of color, and it like obviously like the person of color like has like an emotional like reaction to it. And I think that kind of just like proves like another way like the power differential, like how like the white person has the power, so he like they don't even feel like affected by like the racist comment because they just have never experienced something like a person of color like has in that type of situation.
Yeah. I was gonna kind of build off like the performative aspect of like the elephants, where like I think like in class he brought it up like the you belong thing. I think that's a big like performative thing UWL does. And like honestly, like I think UWL is like they have, I mean, we all have classes that are like required that are supposed to teach us about like diversity and like society. It's like a sociology class or something. And I don't think it does enough personally. Like I don't think it teaches people enough and like challenges them. Because like this class I feel like is the first class that I feel like has effectively like made people think about the problem. And I don't think that like any other professor is doing it like the same way where people are like able to actually apply it. So honestly, just like the fact that UWL is like saying that like, oh yeah, we're like super inclusive, but like they don't actually have courses that challenge their students' schemas, like it's just like it just seems super performative to me. But and then the other thing I was gonna say is like my personal answer to the question. Um, I so like I kind of have a story regarding this. It's so like I lived in Madison for like 18 years. And I wasn't like perfect. Like I didn't always behave, but like I never got the cops called on me. And then within 1 year of living in La Crosse, I got actually accused of a felony in a Target parking lot. And it was pretty crazy. So basically what happened is I lost my AirPods and I like tracked them down. They like said they're in the parking lot somewhere. So I was just walking up and down the lanes and like looking up and down, like looking for my AirPods. And after like 10 minutes, I went back into my car and I was like, okay, they're gone. Like I can't find them. And when I was sitting in my car, like texting my parents, I heard someone yell my name, or like not yell my name, but like yell a name. They were like, hey, something. And I was like, what? So I look in the mirror and it's like the cops. And I'm like, what the heck? And they tell me to get out of the car. And I'm like, okay, I got you. So I get out of the car like instantly and I talk to them. I'm like, hey, what's up? And they were like, yeah, so we actually got a call saying that you were breaking into cars. And I was like, so I basically that instantly made me feel like anxious because I felt like I was gonna have to prove my innocence. Cause I was like, oh my gosh, someone like just accused me, like they saw me like walking around. They're like, he's trying to break into cars, like he's breaking into cars right now, like in the Target parking lot. And I was like, well, now the cops like think I'm a felon or something, like, and I have to explain everything to them. So I was like super anxious. And that just like, I mean, everything worked out in the end. I showed them like the AirPod location. They were super nice. But like, I was still just so anxious the entire interaction because like, I felt like someone had misjudged me and I was like kind of pissed off, to be honest. Because I was just walking around. Like, I didn't even get close to the cars, to be honest. But that's just like my example of like, I kind of learned that I have to be a little bit more aware of my actions in lacrosse because like, the way he put it, like, technically, because like I'm Latino, like technically I'm like a squirrel in an elephant city. You know what I mean? So like these elephants have their own schemas about squirrels, and like I have to be aware of those schemas and maybe like go out of my way to not play on those or whatever. But that's just like how I've understand like the power dynamic. Like I just have to be really aware of their values and like the schemas that are in the cities that I go to. So yeah.
I feel like that was definitely like an example of the person who called like their experiential system like just thinking and like using their implicit biases and just like speaking from that and not even like they probably just like glanced at you like once or like a few times and like immediately thought that's what you were doing. And I mean, if it's kind of like the bike video too, like how they like some of them like didn't even go up to the like black guy who was like doing it, but even the white guy and the girl like they went up to him like had a conversation with him, and some of the people like just immediately like called the cops. So I feel like it was the same thing. Like they if they were to go up to you, like they could
Yeah,
have
no
been
one
like,
talked
oh
to me either. I was just like walking
yeah,
around, and like
yeah,
next thing I know, the cops are behind me. I'm like, what the, like what?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree.
I feel like I agree with like everything that you guys have all been saying. I think for me, it's again like it's not even something you think about. Like the elephants didn't think about the size of the water fountain at all. It's just yeah. So I guess for me, it's like okay, what have I not been paying attention to before that I should be paying more attention to now?
Yeah. I think that something else, one last thing that I noticed is like a lot of people in lacrosse, like they don't have to worry about these types of issues unless they take a class on it. And I just think it's really nice to hear that like you're like thinking about like, oh well, like what wasn't I aware of? Like you're trying to be proactive with it. And like I'm doing the same thing. Like I have to learn like what are my habits that like I'm associating with that because everyone does it. Like it's not like only white people do it. It's like I think everyone does it. So yeah.
I can read the fourth one if we're good. Um, After being exposed to the three blind men and elephant analogy, are you beginning to understand how the practice of ethnocentric monoculturalism in the USA severely limits our perception of reality and comprehension of truth? I said that it's kind of like white people in the United States kind of have blinders on that like because of our patriotism that's been so like habitualized in us that like we think our way is the best way and like the only way. And even just like on a like a personal level, I feel like I'm very quick to like judge something as like weird or like odd if it's done differently than how I would normally do it. I'm like, oh, like my way is like better, like it's more efficient or it's this. So I feel like even that, like on a personal level, not even with a big um a big issue, just minor issues, I see myself doing that. And so an example that I kind of related this to as well was when he talked about like cultural baggage and like in schools. And so I feel like white teachers obviously bring their own cultural baggage and they kind of teach that to students. And so um, the kids who the kids who are of color, they kind of get their they have bring their cultural baggage and then they're learning this new cultural baggage. So I feel like they have a better like perception to use like and apply to their education. Like they're looking at their education with like two different perceptives or perceptions. And compared to like white kids who come already with their white cultural like baggage and ideas, and then all they're learning and being reinforced is that white cultural like values and norms. So I think that's just another way that um, it kind of limits our truths.
I kind of talked about I kind of referenced the analogy more like how the boss would technically like represent the white people. And then like in class we talked about how the boss is like the one that's losing out on it because if you think about it, like white people, they're hurting themselves by not including like different cultures or not being in like not welcoming the diversity. So they just get this one idea in their head, like kind of how you were saying, Maddie, like my way is the best way, my way is the only way. Like it just kind of makes me realize like we really don't know half of the stuff or like we just don't know any different perceptions because that's also goes into like how we're raised and things like that. Like we're never open to it and don't get to see different things like that.
So I guess the example that I was thinking of was like just the way Dr. Sudha teaches the class. I mean, I'm so used to like I think this is the only class I've ever had where it's like more analogies and stories and then it all connects. And like before this class, like I'd only ever been exposed to just like PowerPoints and reading off the slides and whatever. And so you kind of like habituate like this is the right way, this is the best way, whatever. But I've noticed that I like remember things better in this one class than I have like literally anything I've ever been taught. So I guess I just kind of thought about it that way.
So for me, I think that like when you guys were talking, it's just like it kind of made me think of like Choshin. If you guys remember that, like that mindset you have to have where like you go into everything with an open mind. And I just thought that that was really useful because like well then you're taking like all the new information without like any biases. And I think that you kind of have to have like a similar mindset when it comes to like just like understanding reality, like different cultures' realities. Because if you don't have like an open mind about it, then you're gonna be missing out on a lot of different things. And I just think that it's pretty obvious that like there is no one right way to do things, but it's better to have multiple options and understand multiple different ways to do it than just have like one singular way that like and be like, nope, that's the right way. That's the only way I'm ever gonna think of. Like, I think it makes sense to kind of have multiple different perspectives. And I thought it was really interesting because he said that like people of color can benefit from this type of like system where the boss is in charge. And I'm like, I don't get that. But then I got it because it's like, oh, well, you still have multiple perspectives. Like you have the bosses in yours, like you're kind of forced to adopt another perspective. And I think that if there was no boss and like we all just adopted the same perspective, I think that there'd be a lot less stereotypes in general because people would understand each other better. And I think that there would also be like people would just like value each other more. Like we'd have probably just be closer as a community in general. So I just think that like the USA, like we need to do better at appreciating and including specifically like inclusivity of all cultures.
Yeah, I also, with the analogy, just thought a lot about the people of color benefiting and white people being the one who are like hurting themselves with like the fact that there's just when you're going out of like what I say goes and like I'm right and this is the way to do it, like you're missing so much and you don't even know all that you don't know. and you're shutting yourself off to so many different perspectives that you don't even necessarily have to agree with, but just be getting like a well-rounded understanding, you might find one that you like more, or just you might be able to just understand a person and their belief system. So I thought that was like what drew me in the most about the analogy of what people are really missing out on.
Yeah, I think the like quote or that really just like at first I was like, huh, like that's so like weird to think about. But then after he explained it, was kind of like what you guys were saying about like how racism can be beneficial because I feel like everyone's like, okay, like we need to end racism. Like there's all these like different organizations trying to like end it or stop it or like try to diminish it. But then because it's obviously hurting people of color, but it's just like weird to think about it flip that it's actually hurting white people too in a way. Like obviously not to the same
For sure though.
physical extent, but like I don't know if mental extent would make sense, but
You know, I think it's a good point to bring up because like I agree that when you just said that, like I just haven't thought about like racism like being a bad thing in general. Like it goes both ways. Like it just hurts everyone who's involved. So yeah.
Yeah, at first I like he said that and I was kind of confused, but then like not that they're the exact same, but then I thought about in the perspective of how like the patriarchy can hurt men too. Like obviously it can like oppress women, but like it has its own negative side effects of men needing to be like masculine, and they're not exactly the same, but like once I put it in like that way, I'm like, yeah, I can see how that like makes sense, kind of.
Yeah. Another thing I can't, this is entirely off topic, so if anyone has anything real like to say on this, but real quick, just like I thought it was really interesting because like I've thought about this personally, but I thought it was really interesting how you pointed out in class that like women can almost like empathize a little bit better with like people of color because like they're all for like they've all experienced like discrimination and like the patriarchy and everything. And I like that he brings up like that example of like how like gender and like that division, like everything. Because it just like I think it just brings a lot more empathy and like a lot better of a connection to people, I think. And it's really like easy to see like the connection between the two issues.
yeah, when he brings like that side into it, it definitely like drives the point home even more just because that I'm like really able to relate to it. Like obviously like I'm trying to relate to like how a person of color would feel in this situation, like through the analogies, but then like bringing up like the women part of it, it's obviously like something I can relate to. So it's just like a lot easier. So I also think it's super helpful that he does that.
Like that he does that because I think he realizes like the more analogies he uses or like the more he can relate it to a person, which there are quite a few girls in that class, like they can just it makes it a lot easier to kind of understand or even from personal experiences you can kind of relate it then. And to me, like sometimes he's talking about something and I get a little confused, but then when he uses like an analogy, I'm like, oh, that makes so much more sense. Like I got this down now.
I can read the last question if you guys are cool with that. All right. So, are you beginning to notice how the three myths have played and continue to play a significant role in your dealings with topics on race?
I can go. I kind of talked about like I wrote down my answers, but in my answers I kind of talked about each myth individually at first, and then I talked about like as a whole. So for each myth, kind of I talked about like how the myth of meritocracy, like it makes you want to feel good. And when I read that, like it made me think of professor's example of how like the you belong signs, like they're more for the white people, just making it feel good for themselves rather than people of color. And then for the equal opportunity myth, I talked about how it kind of says like everyone has the same starting point and same chance to be successful, but they don't take into account like the history of discrimination and things like that. Like everyone starts different. Some people don't have like easy access to education, things like that, if that makes sense. And that kind of goes along with like the fair treatment one. Like white people say like they're good with equality, but they don't realize that they're not accepting equity, which is what we talked about in class. Like they say that they want all people to be equal, but in reality, like it's not fair. And then putting it all together, I kind of talked about like how it affects me. Like I never like learned about these myths and things like that. So it kind of was eye-opening and made me realize like the myths maybe provoke my white privilege. And so it just I don't realize that it's even happening. So then it's a big eye-opener when we learn about it in class and things like that.
Yeah, I said that the myths were kind of just a form of rationalization for white people, just to make them feel good about having power and like denying that power. Because I said it also is kind of used like to hide their shame and guilt, like shame being that like maybe they're not as hardworking as they thought they were, they just have privileges. And the guilt was that um like they're not wanting to take responsibility for causing harm to people of color. Because I kind of said the same thing about like equity, like white people are quick to say that like everyone has equal opportunity, but or equal treatment, but then equity is brought up, it somehow like becomes unfair, like they deny people need more support because it's supposed to be like equal for everyone. So I kind of just feel like that's like a significant one. They don't want like any unfair treatment, but then they say everything's fair, but it's really not. And um just one that really stuck out to me was the myth of meritocracy. And I kind of said this is something I feel like a lot of like he always talks about like, oh, your grandpa saying this, and that's my grandpa saying this basically. That I feel like a lot of the time it's like preached that like I've worked so hard for everything I have, like I've built my life up for my kids and my grandchildren, and so it kind of just is eye opening that it's really only helpful for white people because they're already ahead in society. So yeah, you could have like built it from nothing and had all this stuff, but you had all these hidden resources and opportunities along the way that had helped you so much more than some people don't have.
I said like a similar thing of being like rationalization, where like when you see people who like will like acknowledge like white people like yeah racism exists, but like I didn't benefit it from it, like I didn't benefit from my own white privilege. Like when you see people like compare racism like how it is now to like how it was like 50 years ago, of ways that are like yeah like we're all fairly treated now, like we had the whole civil rights movement, and just a way to like deal with I guess your own like guilt of the fact that you know that you did benefit, especially with like when people bring up equity and then like having to I don't want to say like just people getting ways to like help them that you don't get even though you don't need them, you know? Like it still would seem unfair, especially if you are truly like rationalizing it so much that like you genuinely think it's because of like you work so hard, you know?
I think that that like working so hard thing is kind of hard for some people because I don't think that the myths are like trying to discredit the fact that they have worked hard. Like it's totally possible that they did work very, very hard. It's just it's an addition, more like it's like you did work hard, but you also had all these things in place to help you, and like you will always have those in place because that's just how it is. Like that's how society works. And I think that it's like these myths are like I think they're more idealistic. Like they're great goals to have. Like if you do work super hard, then you'll be successful. I think that's a great idea, but like I think that we also have to acknowledge that like that's not true. Like if you start at a higher spot than another person, like in the carrot example, if you start at a higher spot, then you're gonna if you work hard, yeah, you'll get the carrots. But if you start at a lower spot, and you work hard, you might not even get the carrots. So like it's just like addressing a little bit more. So like I feel like some of the people like understand it, but they're not understanding the full picture. That like you did work hard, you have great work ethic, but like you also had an advantage. So I think that's why it's so hard for them to understand sometimes because it just feels like a personal attack. But I don't know. And then also there's like the myth of equal opportunity is like for me something I have to deal with is like my name is Sebastian Irigoyen Barrientos. So like on a job application, I saw that there was like a study that like white or maybe he talked about it where like a person with a like a white sounding name on a job application was like more likely to get an interview than like someone with like a minority sounding name, you know what I mean? And like my name sounds like a minority name, you know what I mean? Like so I feel affected. But I just think that it's like very sad that like people don't realize that like the opportunities aren't equal, like they're not distributed evenly. And like someone with the exact same credentials can get different, can have a different outcome. And I think that's what we need to address with that. And for the last one, like fair treatment, I like kind of shared with you guys like my story about like how I was innocent, but like someone, I think that everyone should be like treated like, oh, you're innocent until proven guilty. Like, let's assume that for now. But I didn't get that. I didn't get that type of fair treatment because of who I was. And this lady or man, whoever it was, um they they assimilated the information of me walking around. They changed that information of me walking around to match their schema, and they changed it so that I was breaking into cars. And I don't think that's fair. I felt like that was really unjust, and I was kind of pissed off, like I said. So I just think that like through my own experiences, like I can just see like how these myths like affect people. And like, I think that, yeah, it would be great if it was true. Like, everyone is treated equitably, like, everyone has an equal opportunity, but that's not the case. And it's more of like a goal that we should try and work towards.
So when I was thinking about the three myths, I was actually thinking a little bit about the you belong signs. Because I was thinking about like the equal opportunity, the myth of equal opportunity, and how like, if you put everybody's name on it, if you put all the different languages, like, yep, you equal chance of being here, everybody's got the same whatever. And so I was thinking about it that way. And I guess like kind of same with like the fair treatment is like, all the languages are here, everybody like it's all fair, it's whatever, but like, is it really? And I guess I was thinking about it that way.
I kind of think another thing is like going back to the myth of meritocracy, like how we define success. Like I feel like in America we define it success as like having money and like um material cultures, but someone else could define success as like being able to provide for their family or being able to buy like small thing like the necessities in life, like they're successful in their own way. So I feel like that's just like another like restriction that is there. And also I kind of think it's not true because like he was talking about like model minorities, like Asians are like likely to get these higher paying jobs or that kind of thing. So it's kind of hard to work hard when your job is just you can work as many hours a week as you want, but you're still getting paid like minimum wage. Like it's just such a big difference between like a salary of someone who's like a doctor and they could work significantly less during the week and still make much more.
Yeah. I think that like throughout this, like the questions, when I was like going through them, I was just kind of thinking about how like this kind of ties back like to the first exam content where like cultural encapsulation is just like really the downfall of like the US. Like we really think that we're the best and like we do have good aspects, but like we also have to embrace like other cultures. And I think that these questions like really just kind of emphasize that like it's not okay, like it's bad to be culture encapsulated. Like we should be working against it. We should be working to like we should be seeking out other cultures and like experiencing, seeing if we can experience them. Yeah. I'm pretty good though. I don't think I have anything else to share on that last question, personally.
Okay, I'll end the recording. I don't know. Okay. All right, we're all good. I'll send it. I'll email it to you guys again. But yeah, good job.
Yeah, yeah, good stuff.
Um, Bye, guys. Good luck on the test.
All right, yeah, good luck, guys. See
Bye.
ya.
Good luck.